Do you know why I stopped you tonight?
No, sir, I don't.
You drifted over the fog line back there. Have you had anything to drink or are you just tired?
I'm just tired, officer, coming home from work, that's all.
The flashing red and blue lights didn't shatter the silence of the desolate highway. They bled into it. A sudden, silent promise that the rest of the night was no longer his own. It is in these quiet, isolated moments on the American road where the thin line between a routine procedure and a life-altering assumption is razor thin, and where the most dangerous mistakes are often the quietest ones. The clock on the dashboard read 2:14 in the morning. Marcus Reed, a 34-year-old structural architect, was 20 minutes away from his home in the quiet suburbs outside the city. He had been at his firm's downtown office since 8 the previous morning, finalizing the blueprints for a massive commercial development that was due by noon. His eyes were heavy, burning with the specific ache that comes from staring at computer monitors for 18 straight hours. A half-empty cup of cold coffee sat in the center console next to a loosened silk tie that he had discarded hours ago. He was driving his 5-year-old luxury sedan, a car he had purchased as a reward to himself after making junior partner. The highway was a ribbon of black asphalt illuminated only by the rhythmic passing of sodium vapor streetlights, casting long, sweeping shadows across the empty lanes. Marcus was the only driver for miles, or so he thought, until the darkness in his rearview mirror fractured into a strobing, blinding mosaic of emergency lights. His stomach executed that familiar, involuntary drop. Even when you know you have done absolutely nothing wrong, the sudden appearance of a police cruiser in your rearview mirror on a deserted, unlit road triggers a primal response. His heart rate spiked. His hands tightened around the worn leather of the steering wheel. He glanced down at the speedometer. He was doing 65 in a 65 zone. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't run a red light because there were none. He took a deep breath, checked his mirrors, and carefully activated his right turn signal. Easing his vehicle onto the loose gravel of the wide shoulder, the tires crunched loudly as he brought the car to a smooth, complete stop. He immediately shifted into park, turned off the engine, turned on the overhead dome light, and placed both of his hands squarely at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. It was a routine he had been taught by his father decades ago. A choreography of survival and compliance designed to put an approaching officer at ease. Behind him, the cruiser's doors opened and closed. Heavy boots crunched against the gravel. In the side mirror, Marcus watched the silhouette of a single officer approaching. The beam of a heavy-duty flashlight swept through the darkness, illuminating the trunk of Marcus's car, the back seat, and finally, piercing through the driver's side window, catching Marcus squarely in the eyes. Evening, a voice said from behind the blinding glare of the light. The voice belonged to Deputy Chris Miller. He was 28 years old, athletic, and had been with the county sheriff's department for 4 years. Miller was, by his own estimation, a good cop. He believed in the law. He followed his training, and he genuinely wanted to keep his community safe. But he was also young, heavily influenced by the veteran officers he rode with, and prone to the kind of subtle, unexamined biases that seep into a person after years of looking for trouble in the dark. Good evening, officer, Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady, his tone entirely neutral. He kept his eyes straight ahead, squinting against the harsh light. Do you know why I pulled you over tonight? Deputy Miller asked. The question was standard, the opening move in a very old, very rehearsed script. No, sir, I don't, Marcus said politely. You touched the white fog line back there about 1.5 miles ago, drifted over it for a second before correcting. Miller explained, his tone casual but authoritative. Marcus blinked. The fog line. He had been driving for 40 minutes on a dark, winding highway after an 18-hour shift. It was entirely possible his right tire had brushed the thick white line marking the edge of the road. It wasn't a crime. but it was a traffic violation, a valid pretext for a stop under the law. I apologize. Officer, I'm coming home from my office downtown. I've been working since yesterday morning. Just a little tired. Working late. Miller repeated. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that seemed to hang in the cold night air, inviting scrutiny. The flashlight beam moved slowly over Marcus's face, tracing the exhaustion in his eyes, the high-quality fabric of his dress shirt, and then down to the passenger seat where his tie rested, license, registration, and proof of insurance. Please. Marcus slowly moved his right hand toward the glove compartment. My registration and insurance are in the glove box. My license is in my wallet, in my back right pocket. I'm going to reach for them now. Go ahead. Miller instructed. Marcus retrieved the documents and handed them through the open window. Miller took them, shining his light on the plastic cards. He spent a long time looking at Marcus's driver's license, looking from the photo to Marcus's face, and back again. The silence stretched. It was a silence that felt heavy, pregnant with unstated assumptions. In a vacuum, this was a routine interaction, but Marcus could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The temperature of the interaction was dropping. Is this your vehicle? Mr. Reed Miller asked, emphasizing the last name slightly. Yes, it is. Marcus answered, and you said you were working downtown. Yes, I'm an architect at a firm on Fifth Avenue. We had a major project deadline today. Miller nodded slowly. Though his expression remained unreadable behind the flashlight. You have any weapons in the car, anything illegal, any large sums of cash? This was the pivot, the exact moment the nature of the stop transformed. A traffic stop for drifting over the fog line is legally justified to ensure the driver isn't intoxicated or falling asleep. And to issue a citation or a warning, but asking about weapons, contraband, and large sums of cash crossed a subtle psychological boundary. It signaled that Deputy Miller was no longer investigating a minor traffic infraction. He was fishing for a felony. He was looking at a successful, well-dressed man driving a nice car late at night and trying to reconcile that image with a preconceived narrative of criminality. No. Sir? Marcus said, his voice tightening infinitesimally. He was acutely aware of the danger of showing frustration. He knew the unwritten rules of this encounter better than the written ones. Just my laptop and my bag on the back seat, and some gym clothes in the trunk. All right. Hang tight for me. Miller said, retreating to his cruiser with Marcus's documents. Marcus sat in the silence of his car. He watched in the rearview mirror as the dome light of the police cruiser flickered on. He saw Miller pick up his radio. The minutes began to drag. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. For a simple warning or citation regarding crossing a fog line, 10 minutes is an eternity. Marcus's anxiety, previously managed by logic, began to fray at the edges. He started running through his mind everything in his car, wondering if a misplaced paper cutter from the office could be misconstrued as a weapon, or if his prescription allergy medication was in its original bottle. This is the psychological toll of the prolonged stop, the slow erosion of a citizen's peace of mind as the state exercises its power of detention. 15 minutes into the stop, a second set of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, pulling up directly behind Miller's cruiser. It was another police vehicle, an SUV. The situation had just escalated, and Marcus had done absolutely nothing to warrant it. The door of the SUV opened, and Sergeant Tom Hayes stepped out. Hayes was 45, a 20-year veteran of the force. He was a man who prided himself on his instincts. He often told younger deputies that police work wasn't about reading law books. It was about reading people. But what Hayes called instinct was often a deeply entrenched set of biases, a heuristic filing system that categorized people by race, neighborhood, and the perceived incongruity of their presence in certain spaces. Hayes walked up to Miller's window, leaned down, and spoke quietly. Inside the lead cruiser, Miller explained the situation, got a guy up ahead, touched the fog line, says he's an architect coming from work, clean record. Car comes back registered to him. What's your gut say? Hayes asked, his eyes fixed on the taillights of Marcus's sedan. He seems a little nervous. Miller noted a little stiff, and there was a bolo put out 2 days ago from over in Washington County about a string of high-end burglaries. Suspects were driving late at night. Vague description. But it fits a general profile. Nervous. Huh? Hayes murmured. Let's go have a chat. This conversation, which would later be heavily scrutinized, laid the groundwork for a cascade of procedural errors. Nervousness during a midnight traffic stop is a universal human reaction, not a specific indicator of criminal activity, and citing a vague, days-old alert from another county to justify suspicion of a driver with a clean record and a valid explanation for his whereabouts was an enormous legal stretch. But in the dark, on the side of the road, the police are the arbiters of reality. Both officers approach Marcus's car. Miller flanked the passenger side, shining his light in while Sergeant Hayes approached the driver's window. Evening, Marcus. Hayes said the use of the first name was a deliberate tactic, a subtle way to establish dominance and strip away professional boundaries. Good evening. Marcus replied, his jaw tight. Deputy Miller tells me you're an architect. Hayes continued, resting his hand casually on the hilt of his service weapon. It wasn't a threat, just a physical reminder of authority. Pretty nice car for a guy just drawing pictures all day. The comment was a microaggression, a tiny, sharp barb designed to provoke. It implied that Marcus's ownership of the vehicle was somehow suspect, unnatural. I work hard, Marcus said softly. I'm sure you do. Hayes replied, smiling, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Look, Marcus, we're out here trying to keep the community safe. We've had some break-ins recently. Guys moving stolen goods late at night. You're out here at 2:30 in the morning, crossing the lines, acting pretty nervous. You mind if we take a quick look in the vehicle, make sure everything is on the up and up? This was the critical juncture. The request for a consent search. Under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, citizens have the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. A traffic stop is a seizure. The Supreme Court has ruled, specifically in the landmark case of Rodriguez v. United States, that a police officer may not prolong a routine traffic stop to conduct a dog sniff or investigate other crimes unless they have independent, reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity. Sergeant Hayes did not have reasonable suspicion. He had a hunch based on assumptions. He was deliberately delaying the issuance of the traffic warning to go on a fishing expedition. Marcus knew his rights. He had read about these encounters. He knew that consenting to a search was surrendering his constitutional protection. But he also knew that refusing a search to an aggressive officer could lead to retaliation. He weighed his options in a split second. Officer, Marcus said, keeping his voice carefully modulated, I understand you're doing your job, but I've been fully cooperative. I've provided my information. I'd like to just get my ticket or my warning so I can go home to my bed. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. The refusal hung in the air. Sergeant Hayes' posture stiffened immediately. The casual, dominating demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge. For officers accustomed to unquestioned compliance, the invocation of constitutional rights is often perceived not as a legal boundary, but as a challenge to their authority. You don't consent. Hayes repeated, his voice dropping an octave. Why not? You got something to hide in there. Marcus, I don't have anything to hide. Marcus replied firmly, but I know I have the right to refuse an unwarranted search, and I am exercising that right. Am I free to go Or am I being detained? You're being detained. Hayes snapped. Based on your nervous behavior, the time of night, and the fact that your vehicle fits the general description of a bolo out of Washington County, I have reasonable suspicion to hold you until a K-9 unit can do an open-air sniff of your vehicle. This was the procedural error manifested in real time. Hayes was manufacturing reasonable suspicion out of thin air. Nervousness is not reasonable suspicion. Driving legally at night is not reasonable suspicion. And a vague bolo that lacked specific make, model, or license plate details could not legally justify extending the stop of an identified cooperative citizen. But on the shoulder of Interstate 71, Sergeant Hayes was the judge and jury. For the next 25 minutes, Marcus sat in his car, trapped. He was not under arrest, but he was not free to leave. He watched as Miller and Hayes stood by their cruisers, talking in low tones, occasionally pointing at his car. The anxiety in Marcus's chest blossomed into a deep, suffocating dread. He felt profoundly vulnerable. He was a successful professional, a law-abiding citizen, yet in this moment, he was reduced to a suspect, stripped of his dignity by the subjective judgment of two men with badges. Eventually, a third vehicle arrived, a K-9 unit. Another officer pulled a large, excited German Shepherd from the back of the SUV. Hayes walked up to Marcus's window. "Step out of the vehicle." Hayes ordered. Marcus complied slowly, his hands clearly visible. The night air was freezing. He stood on the edge of the dark highway, the loose gravel biting through the soles of his dress shoes, while the K-9 officer led the dog around the perimeter of his car. The dog sniffed the tires, the trunk, the doors. At the driver's side door, the dog paused, sniffed intensely, and sat down, alert. The K-9 handler called out. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He knew with absolute certainty that there were no illegal drugs in his car, but an alert from a police dog, whether genuine, false, or prompted by subtle cues from the handler, provides probable cause for a full, non-consensual search of the vehicle. All right, face away from the car, interlock your fingers behind your head. Hayes commanded. Marcus was subjected to a humiliating pat-down on the side of the highway as transport trucks roared past, their headlights illuminating his degradation for anyone to see. For 30 agonizing minutes, Miller and Hayes tore through Marcus's car. They pulled his expensive leather work bag from the back seat. Unzipping every compartment, they unrolled his architectural blueprints, letting them drag against the dirty floor mats. They went through his gym bag, tossing his running shoes and sweaty clothes onto the asphalt. They searched the glove box, the center console, beneath the seats. Inside the spare tire compartment, they found nothing, absolutely nothing, because there was nothing to find. Slowly, the aggressive energy of the search dissipated, replaced by an uncomfortable, heavy silence. The officers realized their mistake. They had bet heavily on their biased instincts and had lost. Deputy Miller looked visibly uncomfortable as he began shoving Marcus's belongings back into the car, far less carefully than he had taken them out. Sergeant Hayes stood by, his face flushed, refusing to make eye contact with Marcus. Finally, Hayes walked over. He handed Marcus his license and registration, along with a crumpled piece of paper. "Here's a warning for the lane violation. Make sure you get some sleep before you drive next time. You're free to go." There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the terror and humiliation they had inflicted. There was only the brusque dismissal of a state authority that had overstepped its bounds and retreated without accountability. Marcus didn't say a word. He took his documents, walked back to his car, and climbed inside. He watched in the rearview mirror as the 3 police vehicles pulled away, disappearing into the night. Leaving him alone in the dark, he sat there for a long time, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Tears of pure impotent rage stinging his eyes. He felt violated. He felt targeted. He had followed every rule of society, achieved every marker of success, yet none of it had protected him from being treated like a criminal simply because of how he looked and where he was driving. But the story did not end on the shoulder of Interstate 71. Marcus was an architect. He was a man who understood structure, foundations, and the meticulous documentation of details. The next morning, he did not just try to forget the incident. He filed a formal, highly detailed complaint with the county sheriff's internal affairs division, citing specific violations of his Fourth Amendment rights and detailing the timeline of the prolonged detention. Because Marcus had filed a formal complaint involving allegations of unconstitutional detention, the department was forced to pull the body camera footage from that night. This is where the subtle realities of policing are dragged into the harsh light of objective review. When the internal affairs investigators and eventually a civil rights attorney viewed the footage, they did not see a dramatic, violent confrontation. They saw something far more insidious. They saw a quiet, procedural dismantling of a citizen's rights fueled by assumption. The audio captured the initial exchange where Deputy Miller's tone clearly shifted from routine to accusatory. It captured the conversation between Miller and Hayes, where Hayes asked about Miller's gut rather than establishing concrete facts. The microphone picked up Hayes' muttered comment as he approached Marcus's car, a derogatory assumption about Marcus's neighborhood and income. Most importantly, the timestamps on the video provided irrefutable evidence of the procedural error. The footage proved that the mission of the traffic stop issuing a warning for crossing the fog line had been completely abandoned. It showed a 25-minute delay between the decision to issue a warning and the arrival of the K-9 unit, a delay justified by nothing more than Marcus's lawful refusal to consent to a search, and the officer's biased interpretation of his nervousness. The footage clearly demonstrated that the officers lacked the reasonable, articulable suspicion required by the Supreme Court to extend the stop. The entire search was a violation of constitutional law. The consequences did not happen overnight. Justice in these matters is rarely swift. It is a slow, grinding mechanism of bureaucracy and legal maneuvering. The county attempted to dismiss the complaint, citing qualified immunity and the dog's alert, but the timeline was indisputable. 6 months later, the results of the internal investigation were quietly finalized. Sergeant Hayes, whose instincts had finally been quantified as actionable bias, was quietly stripped of his supervisory role and placed on permanent administrative desk duty pending early retirement. Deputy Miller received a formal reprimand in his file and was mandated to undergo extensive retraining on Fourth Amendment procedures and implicit bias. Marcus's civil rights lawsuit against the county for unlawful detention and illegal search moved forward, eventually resulting in a substantial settlement. But for Marcus, it was never about the money. It was about the public record. It was about forcing a system to acknowledge that the subtle, quiet assumptions made in the dark have real, devastating consequences on the lives of innocent people. The incident on Interstate 71 serves as a chilling reminder of the fragility of our rights. When we think of police misconduct, we often picture viral videos of explosive violence, but the erosion of liberty rarely starts with a shout. It starts with a whisper. It starts with an assumption. It starts with a question asked not to find the truth, but to confirm a prejudice. So ask yourself, if you were pulled over tonight on a dark, empty road and you did absolutely everything right, how confident are you that the law would protect you from the instincts of the person holding the flashlight? Our justice system is only as blind as the people we pay to enforce it.